Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about recital programming, and I've been thinking about this a lot because it's degree recital season and I'm seeing a lot of programs and a lot of them just kind of strike me as boring, and there were easy ways to change that. And that's not to say that the pieces that they're picking aren't incredible and that they are bad or wrong for doing what they did, but I just think if we think about it more critically, we can engage our audiences more, engage ourselves as players more, and help our art form grow rather than kind of sticking to the status quo. Because there's a big idea outside of the classical world that classical music is stodgy and old and boring. And a lot of that has to do with the way that we program concerts. And yes, the large organizations are the biggest culprit of that, but if we can start changing what we do, one, we're eventually going to take over those organizations, and two, eventually we're going to have an impact on the other groups within the classical music world. One of the things that I love on a program is seeing more than just solo flute and piano, or whatever instrument you play and piano. And that's not saying that those types of pieces aren't fantastic, but seeing a wide variety of playing means that you're engaging your audience more. They get to see more than just you and the collaborative pianist that you're playing with, and they get to hear more sounds than just those two. So having a nice variety of ensembles is super, super cool. Yes, I understand that when you're doing a degree recital, you do have categories that you have to stay within, but there are opportunities to bring in a woodwind quintet if you're a wind player, or a duo, or something other than just instrument and piano. So if you have that opportunity, if you have a piece that you think would fit within your requirements, go for it. Because honestly, it's more fun that way. My teacher at Indiana was really, really big on having more than just flute and piano. We actually tried to make my last recital have as little flute and piano as possible, and there were only two pieces that ended up being flute and piano. And I think that was a really effective program because it was exciting and it was different. Along those same lines, that program had a theme. The idea was to show the evolution of contemporary music. So I picked pieces from various eras that were seen as contemporary for that era. The C.P. Bach piece I picked was for a very unusual ensemble of flute, viola, and piano, and kind of explored more of CP's weird tunings and strange chords, and had some really avant-garde ideas in it. I then went on to Mio, who used a lot of jazz influences and polyrhythm and very complicated ideas that not many people were really writing in yet. Then of course I had Varese Density 21.5, which, while being incredibly standard now, still was revolutionary at the time. Had Messiaen, who again kind of changed the way music was written. Fernihow, which we all know how avant-garde that piece is, and then premiered a work for flute and clarinet, which if you haven't heard is Sweet Ass Cycle by Kimberly Osberg, which we've played quite a few times now. That recital fit most of the requirements of a traditional degree recital. It had a flute and piano sonata, it had a Baroque or earlier music, it had contemporary, it had solo flute, it had a lot of stuff in it, and the Mio, while being 20th century, is still old enough that it can fall into the semi-romantic era. What I was really missing was a romantic piece in that program, but since I didn't have that requirement, I was able to work around it. If you switched out the Mio and the Varese for a romantic era piece, you'd have the diversity and all of the requirements you needed. And some of you are looking at me like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to play all the contemporary music that you do. And I'm not saying that you should, but what I am saying is explore the categories more. Most people do a Bach sonata, a romantic piece, a concerto, and then a contemporary piece on their degree recitals. And that's a good model to follow because it does meet all of the requirements that you have and it gives diversity. But instead of just picking like the biggest piece or the most famous piece or the piece that you've heard the most in each category, pick one super standard piece that you really, really want to do, and then in each of the other categories, go off the beaten track a little bit. The Mio sonatine that I played is actually not performed all that often, but it's a really interesting piece, and it is still in the standard repertoire, so you're still appeasing your teacher and learning standard rep, but you're doing something a little bit different. If you pair that with, say, the Nielsen Concerto and then a C.P. Bach sonata and a contemporary work, that's a pretty great recital. And even if you don't want to go super contemporary, you go the Hindemith Achtstücke, or something like a Jolivet solo piece, or the Isan Young Etudes. There's a lot more in the contemporary world than just Robert Dick and Ian Clark, and they're just as approachable as those pieces are. The Jolivet is a little more out there, but still. There are a lot of options for each category than what most people do. So think critically about the way that you're programming them, what you're picking, and why you're picking them. Are you picking the piece just because you think you should, or because you actually want to perform it? And if you do actually want to perform it, are you pairing it with pieces that complement it, or just meet each category? Because that's also the thing, is the curation of the program is important. Just because you have these requirements that you have to meet doesn't mean you have to just shove pieces into each slot. You can think about the way they work together. One of the things that I did with my first master's recital was I had C.P. Bach Hamburger Sonata, incredibly standard, and I had the Franck Sonata, again, incredibly standard, huge works in the flute repertoire, or violin repertoire, if you will. And what I did was picked two contemporary pieces that contrasted it and also complemented them. I had Takemitsu Voice, which is an incredibly standard contemporary work, but is not performed all that often because it does require a lot of extended techniques, and obviously that is what I do. And then I had Pateras Vask's Landscape with Birds. The Vask is a piece I had never heard of before. I had never even heard of the composer, but in my research and trying to find a piece that was less aggressive than the Takemitsu, but still was really in a contemporary sphere, I discovered this piece, and I really love it. So that kind of just basic exploration allowed me to find a piece that I'd never heard of, and I really love. The last thing is think about working with your peers. Commissioning pieces and getting pieces written for you for your recitals is incredibly exciting. You do have to be careful if it's for a degree recital that your teacher is okay with it and that it does meet all the requirements that you have. But if it does, or you're not programming for a degree recital, having contemporary music written for you is incredibly exciting, and it's a great symbiotic relationship to build. And yes, I'm aware of the fact that I'm a broken record about this, but collaboration is super, super vital for what we do. And these composers are people that can help you in your career later in life, and these pieces are fun. And they don't have to be super out there or super contemporary. You can work with someone who fits your aesthetic. Obviously, someone like me is going to find someone who is more avant-garde and someone who is thinking in a sound world that I live in. But if you love tonal music, you can find composers who write tonal music and who are super excited about writing tonal music and are super excited about writing tonal music for you. You aren't required to have the world's most avant-garde contemporary piece on your program just because it was new. New music isn't one thing, and that's one of the problems that we encounter. But that is a whole nother video. Basically, I just want you guys to think more critically about the way that you're programming your recitals within the limits of whatever requirements you have. And obviously, you have to talk to your teachers if you are still in school, and you do have to work within their limits as well. But most teachers are more than willing to help you find that balance and allow you to program your own recitals within their guidelines. So think critically, think outside the box, and hopefully you can come up with some really, really engaging programs that help your audience as well love the music that you're playing. As always, the link for the 52 weeks of flute call is in the description. That closes on Sunday, so don't miss out. If you like this video, give it a like. If you're new here, subscribe. If you want to support me more, check out my Patreon, and I will see you guys on Thursday.